Joshua Morola's podcast.
Lord, we just, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this opportunity. And Lord, today I just first want to just ask for your healing and peace to be with the families of the victims that they lost, those that were so dear to their heart. And Lord, I remember also those that their lives were saved, and we're joyful for that, but I know that even through the saving of their life, they still can be walking through some trials. So Lord, I ask you, Lord, for the survivors, that you strengthen their hearts too. And Lord, I just thank you for the opportunity to be here today with these guys. And Lord, I just pray for your peace and protection over them. Continue to be using them. And Lord, we just ask for this podcast that it's going to be more than just a show and more than just going back in time. But Lord, that you can use this to bring people the knowledge that they need of what really happened in the history, but also to remember that you can use this to bring us closer together and bring our community closer together, the island, the Port Isabel, Laguna Vista, Laguna Heights, that we can be a closer community than we've ever been before. And Lord, we thank you for the past 20 years, and we thank you that you're going to never leave us or forsake us. You're here yesterday, today, and forever. We thank you for this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast. As always, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe now. Everything's coming out on YouTube. We have it on Spotify. We have it on iTunes. But for the most part, it's going to be on YouTube. And I think this is where people can visually see stuff. I think people like to see who was involved, even though it's been 20 years later. So as you can tell, we have a special guest. And I say special guest because you were an integral part of this night, and I think you made these guys feel like a sense of calmness. I think when it got to the point of that night, everything had been just unraveled. Their morale was down. You were a beacon of light, per se, right?
I hope so.
So I just want to introduce you, Pastor Hyde. This is the YouTube audience. Everybody's been watching this. I know people have been following this and want to see people. So I think seeing you now and seeing what these guys are doing here, we're just missing Tony.
They can put a
and
face
of course,
to
yeah, they can put
name.
a face to it. So I'm glad, Roland, you showed up.
Oh, yeah.
I always love it when you're around, man.
It's worth the drive. It's worth the drive. Worth the drive to see this young man.
Oh, wow,
So-
young. I'll take anything I can
If I
get.
had to call you young, I'm still a boy then.
Well, I still see y'all as boys in a way, you know.
Yeah.
So
we were then.
we chatted on the phone a few times, and hearing your story, it's quite incredible from everything that happened that night. Kind of take us back to what you experienced that night when you found these guys at the time that they were like 20 years old.
Well, you know, the way to sort of describe how the night began for me, before I ever got there, I had received a phone call about 2:45 in the morning, and one of the members of my church, Robert Harris, he was the fire marshal, and so there were nights also that he would do security work at Louis and different, restaurants and all. And so I'd gotten a call that night. Pastor Bob did not come home, and the bridges collapsed, and we're afraid that he was on the bridge. And it was his wife Anita who had called me, and so I woke up and told my wife, and she said, "Well, we better all go." And so everyone piled into the little minivan and traveled into Port Isabel, and what is now the Causeway Cafe, that little area there, we just sort of pulled over and parked on the side of 100. And I walked to where they said that the station point was, sort of by the Dolphin Watch area. And so I got down there, and the Harris family, Bob Harris's family, was there, and I just began to talk with them, and we had a prayer. And it was a very sad situation because you're sort of dealing with the unknowns. We don't know that he's there, but people are beginning to rumor and say, Bob was on the bridge. And so I look over after being with them and praying with them, and I saw these 4 young boys, and I know they're men now, but I just saw these 4 young boys, and they just looked traumatized. And so my first thought was, well, they must have been in the accident. They were, a part of this. And so I went over to them, and I asked them, I said, did y'all fall off the bridge? Were y'all in the accident? And they said no, but they began to tell their story to me that, that they had been a part of trying to save lives. But when I looked at them, you could just tell they didn't look like they had just been out on a nice little fishing trip. But you could tell the shock on their face and that they had gone through trauma too, just walking through this situation. And so I believe at that point, I had a word of prayer with them, just, asking God to come into the situation and to
He had been there all
peace.
along.
Yeah.
He had been there all along.
He had been.
You reminded us.
Yeah, the Lord had been there. And so that's sort of how it all started right there. When I saw them, I thought that they were a part of, that they had come off the bridge or something. And then that evening it just began to sort of mushroom. There's words that people were saying, well, this one was on the bridge. We think this one too. Families are trying to account for their loved ones. And there was another couple that went off the bridge, and that's, with Bob, and then with Barry and Chelsea, it was a couple that I'd counseled with and had married them.
Wow.
And then they had little William. So Barry called me. He said, "Hey, preacher," he says, "we're going to do whatever you need to do. I don't know what it's called, but whatever you need to do to the baby." And I said, well, how about blessing? He said, "That'll work." And he wasn't a church-going person, so I went over there and dedicated little William and had barbecue with them. And so Barry and Chelsea, their lives were lost that night too.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
20 years later, now that we're at this point, uncovering a lot of the stuff from different angles, from different people that were underwater, how does it make you feel about the story that we're telling now?
Well, 20 years later, it's like now, I think a lot of people maybe have forgotten about it. And I think that what you're doing is you're bringing it to light in a more detailed way, to where people may not have understood, like, wow, that happened, or this took place. And like I remember that night with these guys, the Lord just sort of spoke to me. And when they had told me that they had already been rescuing some out of the water, to me, I mean, that was just remarkable. Many people, they run from a problem, but they didn't run. They ran into the situation. They wanted to help. And it's sort of a weird thing comparing, generations, 20 years ago to now, because a lot of young people today, they're busy with their games, and here these guys, they were out for a fishing trip. But yet, when the moment arose that they were needed, and I do believe that God used them that night. I think I told them when I was talking with them, Jesus, when he was dealing with his disciples. And so most of these disciples, these were fishermen. And so he spoke to them. He would speak in parables in the Bible. In the New Testament, you'll find Jesus speaking in parables, which are short stories, so that people would understand at their level, and so that's what he was doing with the disciples. And he told them, he said, "Come and follow me, and I'm going to make you a fisher of men." And what he was telling them is, you're still going to fish, but it's not for those kind of fish, but I'm going to use you to reach people. And so that night, I don't know, it just came from my heart. I told him, God has used you guys, what you thought you were going to go out to do. Because, see, I believe that God has a big picture. He already knew, what was going to take place. And he knew that they were going to be placed there in their little boat. And see, it's not for us to know all the details. If we knew everything, I don't know that we would do half of what we do. Right. If we knew the full picture. So God just, he plans things out. And so I believe that he used them that night to be a fisher of men, to not just go out on a casual fishing trip to catch some reds or trout, but to be able to save some lives.
Which you all caught nothing.
Nothing, not a single, and that trend hasn't improved.
Yeah.
We still go out and catch nothing.
Let me ask you this, Roland. We had this conversation off camera where you don't have children at that time,
Right.
And you're like, well, why? How did this come over me? What do you feel like talking to now, Pastor Hyde? What do you feel that was going on?
Well,
that night?
it's kind of comforting but eerie because your voice. I don't even have to look at you. Just your voice just brings that blanket over me again. This real just calmness. This real just
Steadiness.
Yeah, exactly. And right when you got off your car, when I first saw you, I just instantly the glasses, your hair, the way it came at us. That's the way it felt that night. Just here's someone that's finally going to pick us. Remember, we were overlooked by the police. We were overlooked by people that were back and forth, EMS. As a matter of fact, you called the EMS to come help Robert because you noticed that he was burned.
Right.
So even like that, being on the edge of the bridge, we were still timid. We were still quiet, in pain. And so besides bringing us spiritual comfort, you brought us actual relief from getting someone to come hear us. Because we look like kids on the side of the bridge. But being here, being in this house right now is extremely comforting, extremely warming. Because we were here about a week or two after this, and you had a service that we were a part of. And
Yes.
you mentioned the fishermen, and I went home, and there's no Google back then, so I had to open it up, and it took longer to find it than it
Well,
would
I got you into
nowadays.
the Bible.
You did.
Yeah.
You did, and I'll be really honest with you. Whenever there's been any issues in my life when I needed to see counseling, unfortunately, I didn't go to any other church or any other facility to do that. I just thought about, had my own thoughts, and the only thought I could think of is a fisher of men. God used you once. Whatever hardships you're dealing with now, He's using you again.
That's right.
So you'll figure it out because too much good has been done through you. There has to be more for you.
He has a plan and
Yeah,
purpose for you.
I really sincerely
Yesterday,
believe that.
today, and forever.
That's right.
Robert, let me ask you, when you all got onto the pier finally, there was a time where Pastor Hyde had called over the authorities.
Yeah.
Talk about that, and then lead into how that made you feel, because there was some turmoil there that happened.
Well, after you prayed for us, you noticed that my shorts were kind of burnt into my thigh here, and we were pretty beat up. So he rushed over to go get help for us. And in that process, other entities heard that we were involved in the accident. So naturally, they gravitated to us. But when they realized that we weren't in it, that we were in the water, as soon as they tended to me and Roland, who were the most banged up, their curiosity got the best of them, and it didn't make sense to them why we were out there because of the riptide that night, because the boat ramps had been supposedly closed. And I think in conjunction with what happened in 9/11, their minds or their thoughts were still catering to the possibility that there could have been some malice intent that night. And I think that's what took hold of them when they grabbed Roland and us and myself and began ushering us to the Port Isabel Police Department on foot. Roland's right. When Pastor Hyde walked up to us, there was a calming effect there. You need to understand that we say that we were standing there, and I think the people who are listening kind of envision us just kind of standing there with our arms crossed, like, okay, we did this. We were still very much in shock. There was a lot of heavy breathing. Tony was still in this funk. He could not shake what he had just witnessed until Pastor Hyde walked up to us. There was our life was just a blur of sirens and voices on radios and a lot of shuffling around, and it was just chaotic. As soon as he came in and asked us those questions, he engaged us in a way to where we had to answer but there were very emotionless answers. It was just kind of like a yes and a no, and there was fatigue. When he prayed for us, what had happened didn't matter anymore. You know, we did our best, and we did what we could, and I realized then exactly what you had said. God had placed us there, and it's almost as a reel of little things that happened that night that led to us being there flashed in my head. Had the owner of the bait shop, the Quick Stop bait shop, denied us service, as he should have, because they were closing when we got there. He didn't have to sell us anything. He didn't have to tell me, just fish under the boat. You know, you don't have to go too far. Just tie yourself up to a pillar and fish there. That was the Lord's work. When Leroy turns at us in the boat and says, "Hey, what would you guys do if cars started falling in the water?" That was the Lord's voice we recognized coming from Leroy's mouth, man. It was him talking to us, prepping us for what was to come. I had no earthly ability to imagine that those things were happening by his grace until Pastor Hyde walked up on us. Everything made sense at that point. And when you can come to terms with the fact that it wasn't a decision that you made yourself, you were being used. You were a tool. I needed you, and I placed you here to do that. I think that's where courage and boldness and things like that comes from. I think that we get possessed by the Spirit, and they use us. He uses us to do his good work, and if we pay attention, he's talking to us through these little signs. We've just lost the ability to recognize them. Pastor Hyde was the last piece of the puzzle that I snapped in, and then I could see the picture, and the picture was his hands moving us around and doing things. That's the peace you feel when you get here. Mm-hmm. That's the tranquility that you feel when you get here, because it is the presence, and it's not of the individual,
No.
but it's of the Lord, and of that energy that inspires us to do good, that gives us courage when we need it. When I lacked it, Roland gave it to me in the form of a kiss. Why things happen? If I sit here and try to answer that question, my mind will explode. I've come to terms with there's no other explanation than the good grace of God.
Pastor Hyde, let me ask you, because we've had a lot of people comment on the podcast and the YouTube comments. Some people are saying God was there with you all. What about God wasn't there for the people that fell off the bridge? How do you approach that? Because for me, as a host of a show, I don't know how to answer this. I don't know if you guys know how to answer it, but I believe you would be the person to address
I'll tell
that.
you this, there's a lot of questions in life that we're going to always have. And things don't always turn out the way that we would want them to. And I don't know that, there's an old song that says we'll understand it better by and by. A lot of these answers we'll get when we face Him and when we see our Lord face to face. The things that I think He'll answer all of our questions for us. But, to try to, what Robert was saying, to stop and try to analyze everything, it'll make you go crazy. I don't know, I don't think they know this, but over the holidays, I lost my baby sister. Just 47 years old.
Oh.
She'd been a librarian for years. A misdiagnosis of COVID.
Wow.
She thought that she had it, and she didn't. She had a pulmonary embolism, and before we knew it, she was gone. And my father's been a minister for over 70 years. He'll be turning 91 this month. And even Dad, he has questions, and my mother. And so what we have to do is we have to put things in the hands of God. Only God knows. So what we deal with is what we do know. And that is that they were there. So everyone has their own beliefs. My belief is that God had them there for this reason. to be able to analyze, but what about the victims? You know, we don't know. And we don't understand. But what I do know is that God did use them at that moment. And even through the funerals that I conducted, God used those situations to touch lives. I'll never forget, I never would have ministered to 200 or 300 surfers, but I did because of Barry and Chelsea. And we had a wonderful service in memory of them. I never would have ministered to all the firefighters and police officers like we did at Robert Harris's funeral. I'll never forget with Barry and Chelsea, there was a cremation done, and there were 200 surfers on surfboards.
Wow.
And to watch them take the ashes out into the Gulf. I'd never been a part of that, but I was able to minister to those people. They never would have come into the doors of this church. So there were some positive things that did turn out of something that was a tragic event. And these young men, they'll never be the same again. But hopefully they can take what God has done through them, and you know, He has us in different places, and He's going to use us. The thing I want to get across is it's not about your ability, but your availability. See, a lot of people, they're sort of on the edge. They're like, well, I want to let God use my life, but you know, I don't have enough talents. I don't have enough gifts. I don't have enough abilities. But God's not looking for that. He's just looking for a heart, someone that's just available. And so, by no means do we want people to think that, you know, that they were gifted and talented. I'm sure you are gifted.
Don't give us too much credit. Don't give us too much credit.
But I really believe that what it was is they were available. And when the time came, God sent them forth, and they were willing to help.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does it make you all feel seeing Pastor Hyde so many years later?
I'll say that it makes me fear for lack of communication. We should not have waited this long to rekindle this. You know, it makes me think that there are people of value in my life that I haven't reached out to.
That have always been there.
Yeah. You don't, it's funny because you don't bring back memories to me of that night. It's more of a serenity. Like I feel like I've missed too many barbecues with the pastor, you know? So it's surreal because to walk into this church and knowing that I have a friend that I can count on, I feel a little embarrassed. Shame on me. I haven't taken advantage of conversations that I know you'd be willing to have with me.
Well,
So
yeah. Well, you had to come to my
bitter,
house
so-
because I've never been to yours.
So you know, and I've driven by here several times. So honestly, I feel a little guilty because there's value here, and hearing you speak and reminiscing about the things we endured that night is that is what it is. It's a part of our story. What I feel is just a little embarrassed and a little ashamed that's the only thing that we had in common was that night. I'm sure there are more things, and
We can make new memories.
we can make new memories. So I feel a little saddened about the time that I've wasted, but inspired of for what's to come.
Roland?
Yeah, Robert hit it perfect. I've in the last 20 years, I've probably been on the island at least 200 times or more, if not more. And just with the little nod to myself, regardless of who's in the car, just a little nod, like, all right, there's Pastor Hyde. And nonstop, whether I'm crossing or coming. I was here 2 weeks ago. I came by, I pulled into the Isabella's to pick up a taco, and then I think you were having service because the parking lot was full. And I said, I'm wearing shorts. I'm not welcome there right now.
Yes, you are. You come as you are.
Come as you are.
Shorts
But after
and
the
a
night I had.
That's when you need to come the most.
But the thing is, it's that nod, that acknowledgement that there's my comfort that I
Yeah,
need
that's the veil.
that will last. So if I don't see you for another 20 years,
Well, let's don't do that.
No, but know this, that the impact you had then lasted
It was an imprint.
quite a bit.
Yeah, it's been imprinted.
It's been imprinted quite a bit on us, and on no other explanation. Rather than go crazy thinking about what we did and how it came together, rather than go crazy, it was Pastor Hyde said it best, and I just use it over and over: the fisher of men, and that's just the best way to just stop thinking about what we could have done better. We already did what we needed to do.
Yeah. Because see, God will take the natural, and then when you bring God into the situation, the natural becomes supernatural. It may look in the natural realm one way, but God's actually doing something supernatural.
We experienced that evening, hands down. I've never been, if I was in church growing up, it meant that my father had recently tripped over the same stone and told my mom, I'm going to change, I'm going to start going to church, we're going to go to church. And then for the next 4 or 5 consecutive Sundays there we were at church, and then that would dissipate. Church for me wasn't very present in my upbringing, but the fear of God was. The fear of disappointing, God, and we all had the 10 Commandments up on the wall in the entrance. So we were spoken to about God as much as they knew how to speak to us about it. And then as I got older, it became a chore, it became something that I didn't want to be a part of, but I always had that undertow of, but I don't want to upset God. That evening, religion didn't matter.
That's the key.
How much time?
This is the key.
How much time I spent in the church didn't matter.
Yeah.
It didn't matter whether I could quote scripture. I was a sinner at the time, and I still probably am, I'm pretty sure. And it didn't matter. I was God's child, and He needed me, and He needed Roland to convey to me that we were going to be okay. But for the time being, God needed my attention and my relationship with Him to be stout enough to trust that He was going to take care of us. And we went towards that bridge. So that night, I didn't inherit a love for religion or structured religion. I didn't inherit horrible, traumatic memories, which are there. What I inherited is an innate knowledge that we're His tools. We're here by His grace. And what you said a little while ago about something being very natural turning into something supernatural, it struck a chord with me, because it was very natural for us to go night fishing. It was very natural for us to be in the water. That night became supernatural when we were needed by Him to tend to the people who were in the water. That day, my relationship with the Almighty was cemented in something tangible, a scar that I could have, that I still have. Every time I've gone through a trying period in my life or thought that I was alone, I remember how dark it was that night and how we were still able to do magnificent things. Captain, what was his name? Steve, right?
Captain Steve.
Captain Steve said, I don't know how you guys survived. I don't know how you guys didn't get capsized. I don't know how it was so choppy and so dark and so this. And I'm going to tell you something. While we were there was zero concern for our own safety. There was zero concern for this is going to get worse or escalate. After Roland told me, Robert, we need to go help. There could be kids in there. It was as if he had put some sort of, an armor over me, man. And then it didn't matter anymore. As you said, Roland, you're right, let's go. And we went. A man or an individual convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. I've heard that saying somewhere. It didn't apply that night. I was convinced against my will, but I was no longer of the same opinion that we shouldn't help. So our availability, like you said, is what matters. So if you make yourself available to be used by the Almighty, you can save lives, even if it's just calling an old friend who might be, missing you and feeling down or suicidal, and you decide to call him. That's God using you to interrupt what he doesn't want to happen. So I think that if we open ourselves up to that, just simply that, just be available. I think things as epic and as monumental as what we've lived through can derive from it. Relationships, 20-year relationships.
Let me say something real quick. You said about your relationship with God was cemented. And see, this is the key, because religion is empty. Religious rhetoric and just going through the format of religious expression. What God is really looking for is a relationship. There's an old phrase that I've heard for years, and it says, going to church doesn't make you more of a believer than going to McDonald's will make you a hamburger. You can sit inside the church building and just go through the motions. You can, just go through the religious expressions. But it's that deep, that relationship within your heart that only you can have with God and that he created you to have with him is what will carry you through. And so it was the relationship that you had with him that activated you into being used. And you were available, your heart was ready, and he used you.
And he used us. I believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly. As much as I know that the four of us are sitting here, now I know that God was there with us that night. There's no other explanation.
Let's not downplay the traumatic experiences that obviously happened, but then happened after the fact, when you all were ushered in, interrogated, and then going into the court system. We've kind of already touched on that, but I can tell when I talk to you guys, like there's something there that you're still dealing with, especially because I see you
we spend
often.
the most time together.
So I can tell, I can feel it, and I can tell, and I see sometimes you're very reserved about your feelings, which I completely understand.
Thank you.
But that's not, you also went through some traumatic experiences as well after the whole situation, Pastor Hyde. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, well, first, whenever I was with these young men and we had prayed together, and I went over and talked to a couple of EMTs. I believe Charlie was one of them, and I told Charlie, I said, one of these young guys, they've been burned on their leg. And then I told a couple of the other officers, because they were just sort of separate, they were down there by themselves. And I said, God used them. They've saved some souls. They've saved some lives. And I even went over to Gilbert Hinojosa, the county judge, and I let him know, we got 4 young men over here. I think later on they were, after their ordeal, they were recognized by the county. But it was the strangest thing, because here I'd been praying with them and working with them, and then I went and let them know that they were needing medical attention, and probably about 30 minutes later, I see them taken away. Wow. So I'm following them. And so I was like, where are y'all going? No, you just stay back. And all of a sudden now I'm told that I can't be near them. And so that was sort of a strange thing.
That was hard for us, because at that point he was our security blanket.
Yeah.
He was the only person
He
that
was
had offered.
he was basically our father out there that was going to speak for us now.
He became mother hen to us, and then all of a sudden they were blocking him and saying, no, they're going somewhere else, you can't follow them. And we're looking back at Pastor Hyde like that was the only face that we had any trust in at that moment.
And I asked, where y'all taking them? And no one would tell me.
Nobody would tell us.
So finally, one of the officers says, well, they're over at the PD. They're at the station, at the office. So I went on and got back into the van and traveled with my family, went over there and went up to the door, and they said, no, they can't have anyone in here with them. And so I ended up waiting. It was several hours. And finally they came out, and I was able to talk with them. But it sort of took a turn that I had not expected. And then there were some, I was there ministering to some of the people, other family members, that they needed someone that could pray with them too. And so I just pretty much was, like we've talked about, being available. Lord, wherever you want me to be used. And I'll never forget praying with the Martinez family, with Hector's family. And then someone called me and, hey, this family would like for you to go pray with them. And so it was just sort of being wherever God needed me, just be there. And so some of the attacks came from within. Sometimes people don't understand what you may be doing. The days to come, they would bring bodies out, and families needed somebody there that could pray with them, thanking God for their loved one, praying peace and strength with them. And so I would do that. And so there were some ministers that didn't understand really what was going on, that I was just being there to be used as a tool also to help them. And so some came from people that, judgments from people that I never expected, that were close to me, and then others from that I didn't even know, of the clergy, that they just didn't understand the situation. No one was there. I wasn't there to try to take people or get people to come to my church. No, nothing like that. It was, how can I be used of God to help bring peace to this situation that's, the loss of lives, the hearts that were hopeless, they needed hope. And so that's what I felt God had me there for, was to try to bring that, be His hands, be His feet.
Well, you brought that hope to us, for sure.
This was such an event that had such magnitude, and a lot of people talk about this being the 9/11 of the South Padre Island. Why don't you think it's getting more love, I guess, from South Padre Island or Port Isabel about it?
We sort of have this tendency with time that things that are joyful and wonderful, we want to remember them. But then the things that, bring sadness, people don't realize that God can take sadness and He can take dismal situations and He can bring about joy and new beginnings. And so sometimes people, they just want to try to forget. But yet I want to remember, because these were lives that were lost, that we still need to be praying for their families. But then again, you have William, and he was just an infant. I've been able to see him later on in life as he grew up. But a lot of people, they tend to just sort of put it in the back, let's just forget about that. But yet it is a part of our history.
Exactly right.
It happened that night. You can try to forget about it all you want, but it's not going to go away. It happened. And so we learn from that. And maybe what we need to learn is to allow it, like it did then, it brought us closer together. It can still do that. And I think it is right now.
Yeah, I think it is right now. It made strangers friends. It made children into men, and I think that it has done good. And you're always going to find some sort of turmoil, and especially a darkness right before the light. And I think over the last 20 years, I've taken away a lot of positive things from it. Sometimes, I've walked onto the beach and seen people who either have recognized me from then or are now recognizing me from the podcast, and come up and say, hey man, I saw your podcast, I heard the story, that's awesome, you did amazing. Back then, growing up, our culture doesn't teach us how to receive compliments well. We're taught to be very humble. And so when back then, when receiving a compliment, the discomfort of receiving it, not knowing how to or what to do with it, would often force me to retreat from that individual. And for all I know now, those compliments could have been coming from somebody that God wanted me to have contact with. And instead of me engaging and saying, thank you, let me shake your hand, what's your name, and receive it well, I would shy away from it and say, hey, thanks, it wasn't much. The humility would overwhelm me into a little cocoon. And now when people tell me, hey, Rob, that was outstanding, what you guys did that night, rolling, kissing you in your forehead, and I heard this, and they're reciting back things to me that I've said, it is very much so uplifting. It's well received. And now I say, what's your name? Let's talk, let's visit. and let's converse about different things. And I see my network of friends and acquaintances and people that I have things in common with, yet I don't physically know them, has been birthed through this. So I think that retelling the story is, at least for now, giving me the opportunity to respond better to compliments when it comes to that night, and praise for the things that we did that night. And now that I know how to receive that, it's been the birth of a bunch of relationships, and new acquaintances that I think bring value to at least my life right now.
Have you ever experienced anything like that, Roland?
Well, I'm in San Antonio, so the bridge story doesn't exist in San Antonio. But with my family members, my girlfriend and her family, because that's my extended family now, I get that positive feedback, and it just goes back to being used by the Lord to do this thing we did. Because I flat out got asked, well, what would you do now? And my first response was, well, I don't think I would do that. But I was put in a situation about 3 years ago on the Strip in Las Vegas. There was a shootout inside of a bus, a commuter bus. And me and my girlfriend were there, and she reminded me once again the calmness that came over me when everyone was frantic and running. I was telling her, hold on, let's wait before we get off, because the bus was from here to that back wall. That's how close we were into the middle of this shootout. And her car stayed on the Strip for about 5-6 hours when they investigated it. But she started telling me, no, I remember you being so calm. I remember you walked over to the lady that got shot and said, hey, do you need any help? What's going on? You got water from the valet for her, and left. And then it's when it hit me like a ton of bricks again. Okay, I thought all this time I will never be in a situation where I have to calm people down, or my girlfriend at the time, and get a positive feedback, positive result. So her telling me that story again about what happened, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I'm a true believer that us, you, even you, Josh, even you coming and doing all this. I know it's a lot of work to put these lights up and all that.
Right.
You're being used as a tool right now to get our word out and comfort. And I've listened to the podcast.
So do I.
All those views, probably me, constantly listening to it, because I could hear it over and over, and it's amazing how many parts that just ring a bell back and forth. And then when you told me Pastor Hyde was willing to come and speak, I drove down to San Antonio. I woke up at 5 a.m. I drove straight over here, and I mentioned it. It was such a comforting, calm drive. I didn't realize that I had no radio on until I hit Raymondville, all the way down from 37, 77, and it was just this comfort that came over me, and it's still over me. So you just recharged my batteries for another 20 years.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I don't think people really understand about the platform of podcasting. It can go into as much detail as we want. We can keep going, keep digging, and keep getting so many people's perspective, because I think this podcast would have ended a long time ago if it wasn't such an event of magnitude.
Yeah.
Right.
There's so much depth to this. There's so many people involved, and every week somebody comes out and talks about something. I was in Austin a while back, and a lady had called me, and she said that she had been dreaming about that bridge collapsing 4 years before, and she would tell everybody, and she lost a bunch of friends and family members because they thought she was crazy, and she was crying on the phone, and she was like, and it happened. So it's very interesting, because certain things happen in my life too, where everything coincides now. Like I see different things from the podcast, but it's very interesting to see how it's unraveling, per se.
And how it affected. I had no idea that there was any kind of turmoil or backlash for your efforts that night. Like it baffles me that people would misconstrue that from any angle. So I find it almost even a little offensive, because I have this personal attachment to you and an association with you of that evening, being nothing but humble and open to whoever needed him. So to get backlash, or to get that misconstrued or painted in an ugly picture is sorely disappointing to me, because although you weren't able to be in the water that night, You sure did do a lot of saving in the little time that you were there. Had we been lost in our thoughts for moments longer in that huddle, I don't know how deep down the rabbit hole I would have gone in, because the amount of fear we were experiencing was real. It was we could see it on each other's faces. We couldn't speak about what had just happened because we were still in the middle of processing it. Pastor Hyde comes up and offers his a gentle touch on the shoulder, and it seemed to dissipate. So I feel a little bit attacked right now, hearing what you had to endure 20 years ago, and it confuses me. I don't think that should have happened.
Well, it's it's hard to sorry. You don't always know what people are judging the motives.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it for the Lord, you just put it into His hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no matter what you're attempting to do, your motives can be judged. But when you know that you're doing it with the right spirit, with the right heart, just like you guys, when you're given compliments, it's a good thing whenever you're not, when you feel like, well, I don't want to hear this, that's not a bad thing, because that's a protective thing that God has in your heart to help you resist pride.
Okay.
Because the Word tells us pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. So God doesn't want us to walk in pride. He wants us to walk in humility. But then we can sort of overreact with it to where when a person's trying to give a compliment to you, you don't know how to receive it. God wants you to receive it with a humble heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hit it when you said, it's because He used me. And all the glory goes back to Him.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, in essence, everything that happened that night with God using y'all was God using you.
Mm-hmm.
And so He's getting the glory. We thank Him for giving you the wisdom and knowledge to do what you did. And so life is a journey that we take that if we allow the Lord to guide us, He will. And then when He gives us direction and we walk in it, it's amazing, the lives that can be touched.
Before we finish off the podcast, I got one more question, but also I want to remind you all to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't. Share it. We're trying to find more people. We have Gustavo Morales, which actually reached out to us. And I was driving back from the captain's interview, which is kind of weird because I was coming off the bridge, and then I get a friend request from Gustavo. And I was like, wow. So I was like, can I call you? Let me get you right now. So that was super interesting. So we have him coming, I believe next week we're going to film something with him, which he was one of the survivors, one of the 3 only survivors. But before I ask the question, do you all have anything that you want to share with Pastor Hyde or vice versa?
Well, I just love you guys, and it's never too late to make new relationships and to rekindle, our friendship from years ago. To be honest with you, that's why I said yes to you. My boys had been showing me, and then I shared it with my wife, and I asked her, I said, hon, what do you think I should do? And she said, yeah, go on and, what will it hurt? It will only help. And so both of my sons had been showing me, the podcast, and so I didn't realize it, but my mother had gotten involved with this, and I get a call from you, and I'm like, well, how did you get my number? And you said, from Rosa Watkins, and I was like, wait a minute, that sounds like my mother's maiden name. And so I said yes to it, really, not just for the podcast to go out publicly, but I wanted to see you guys.
Likewise.
And I would like to see the others too, and reach out to them.
We're working on that.
And whatever I can do, I'd like for us to, I think that through this we can become better friends.
Sure.
And not have to wait 20 years.
And not have to wait 20 years.
And I love San Antonio.
Hey, open invitation.
One of my kids lives there.
Oh, there you go.
I heard he's a really good cook too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I can barbecue.
Honey, can we go to San Antonio? She said yes.
I agree, Pastor Hyde. We should not waste any more time in cultivating what we established 20 years ago, that we are friends and that we are here for one another. When you told me that Pastor Hyde had agreed to see us, I honestly felt a little embarrassed that I hadn't been back.
Yeah.
So I think that today lesson for me was don't judge yourself. Like Rowan said, sometimes we come and we look horrible. We're coming back beat up from the beach, or we smell like bait, and the call to stop and peek your head in and see his face and say, hey, remember me, has been ever present in my life every time I drive through here. And I'm going to tell you, I feel a little ashamed that I never acted on it.
But you're here today.
But I'm here today, yeah, and it goes back to those signs I was talking about. When you feel the urge to check in on a friend or to recultivate a relationship that you missed, that could and probably is the higher power trying to nudge you in that direction. So every time I've driven past this assembly here, knowing that there is a friend in it, I feel embarrassed that I didn't stop more often. I really do. So if anything, I can say that that's just another positive check mark on the results that this podcast has been bringing me personally. I got to recultivate something here, and I got to see a lack of use of a tool that God is using every day here. And the tool's been in the shed without me too long, so I think that it's a good reunification of friends here, man. And I'm going to capitalize on this warm feeling that I have here, being here now.
Absolutely.
I like what you said earlier about not receiving compliments because you don't want us to be prideful. That's amazing that you say that, because that's exactly what it is. Because I come out down here, waste a day, but for me it's not a waste to be able to get people to hear more about what's happening, only because, not that I want to be recognized or I want anything to come from it, it's that if you hear the story and the way it plays out, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Our 20 years that have they've gone untold to our family members, to our friends, to people that know us, to each other.
Yeah, to each other.
I mean, me and Robert got secrets. It's shameful that we have them, but it's just the thing we have. But back to the pride thing, it's amazing. That's exactly how it feels when we get these. We were at an event and we actually wanted to be taking photos with, and that was just a weird
How do you
feeling.
react to
Like,
that?
I'm nobody to want to take a photo with. But you hit it perfectly. We're accepting it, and we're not being prideful. And we're not.
And here's the thing, this is the third person of the Trinity. We believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is really the Holy Spirit helping you guard your heart. It's a guarding of the heart so that you don't get prideful.
It's a defense mechanism.
That you stay humble. And there's nothing wrong with that feeling. But at the same time, receive them. Receive it with joy.
I think that's what I've come to terms with. When I receive them, they truly make me feel not prideful or arrogant, but they make me feel like I'm at home, like somebody's being genuine with me. And I think that genuine sentiment is what we find unfamiliar sometimes, because people do use compliments loosely, and they are free and cheap sometimes. So we never really knew how to gauge them. But when people hear this story and offer a praise or a compliment, there's a tone in their voice that rings sincere.
Yeah.
And that's the tone that I don't recognize sometimes, and that's the one that I don't know how to absorb. It's foreign to me for somebody to really be genuine and say, I don't know you, but I'm proud of you. It's condescending. It sounds condescending, Rob, but man, I like that I know you and that we're cool, because when I tell this story, I can say, yeah, I know that guy. To me, it is an uncomfortable feeling to be referred to or suggested that I am something more than what his potential is. And all that flows through my mind, and I wouldn't know how to receive it. Now, when people tell me that, I tell them, dude, bring it in for a hug. That's great. Let's talk about it. And I allow myself to engage with an individual instead of, running away from the discomfort. So now to hear you say that that's protecting our heart, it's a defense mechanism to keep us from being prideful and arrogant and to grow, overly confident. That makes perfect sense to me now.
It is, and let me just give y'all a key that my father gave to me, and I want to give it to you. This is how I've lived my life, because, people will say, Pastor, thank you, and thank you. And so when I walk away, and you don't have to do it out loud, just in your heart, or you can do it in your breath, just say, Lord, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Gratitude.
Yeah, just give it back to him. And as they thank you, just say, thank you.
I like that. We didn't start the podcast with a little prayer, but maybe we should end it with
Absolutely.
one.
Right before we do that, when you told me the story the second time over the podcast, there's a part with a woman in the water.
Mm-hmm.
I have to talk about that. 'Cause
Okay.
This is where either people tune out and they're like, nah, forget it. This is BS. Or they're like, wow, there's a whole other aspect here. Kind of talk to Pastor Hyde about that, because it is alive in people's affidavits. Talk to him. I want you all to have that conversation.
You know what? That's actually a pretty good. You're actually the pretty perfect person to ask that question. Aside from all of the serendipitous coincidences that led us to be at that moment under that bridge and with that thing, that night we all witnessed a woman, and she called to our attention, and she was there, for lack of a better way of describing it. And then all of a sudden she wasn't, and what we found was Renee. Later that evening, I make several calls to Renee's household, and I speak to a woman. And fast forward 2 weeks after the bridge collapse, I come to terms with the fact that the woman that we all saw was never recovered, never found. Nobody ever asked or filed a missing person.
Right.
And 2 weeks after that, we're visiting Rene in the hospital room that he's still recovering in from his injuries. And his father comes out and tells me that Rene's mother had passed away 2 weeks prior to the bridge accident in that very room. They called off the search for this woman that exists only in our memories and on our affidavits after 3 days, because they couldn't find a body and nobody was missing. All the bodies were accounted for that had gone into the water, and those that were rescued were obviously being tended to. So we have come to the conclusion, since we all saw her and since she brought us to where Rene was resting face down in the water, just floating, that it was his mom. Because when we walked into that hospital room, a picture on the nightstand with a striking resemblance of the same white blouse and woman that we saw guide us to where Rene was sitting there. How should I process that? And should I guess I should, but how should I interpret it when people tell me, yeah, that didn't happen, man?
Well, in my 30 plus years of ministry, I've seen, I call it really like mysteries of God. There's a lot of mysterious things about the Lord. Even things that he did. We're celebrating the Easter weekend, last weekend, the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that a lot of people don't know most people think he died on the cross. 3 days later, he rose from the dead, and then he went up to the Father. And he's sitting at the right hand of the Father. He ascended. What they don't realize is there's a 40-day period recorded in the Bible that he actually walked the earth performing miracles in 40 days. There was a 40-day period. 1 month and 10 days, 10 of our time. 40 days that he walked the earth. In one account, he actually walks through the wall, a block wall, a rock wall. He walked right through it, and there he is standing before his disciples. So there's a lot of mysterious things about the Lord, things that he does. So to the natural mind, here again, we're talking about the natural. People will put things off, but God does supernatural things. Let me give you one example. My mother, even right now, she's asking the Lord to give her a sign of some peace and strength concerning my sister. You know, this happened real quick. And I've been praying for God to show Mom and Dad something. And one of the things that he did with my grandfather is my mother had asked the Lord for a sign then. And one night she was sleeping, and he just woke her up, and then I don't know if it was a vision or a dream, but she saw my grandfather walking through like a lake of water, dressed all in white. Well, Grandpa never dressed in white. He was a machinist, a tool and die maker. But God gave her that glimpse just to show her, I believe, he's okay. My grandpa, my papa, her mother, he's with me, he's okay. And so I believe in the mysteries of God. I think that they exist, and whether it was really Renee's mom at that moment or God giving a vision of her in the water, to me, I'm going to say, you knew that it happened. What you saw was real. And so I believe that it was, once again, God involved in the situation. And if I remember right, y'all were able to find him right where the last place that she was.
Where she was.
So, I believe that God was at work again. And I'm not going to draw conclusions. I don't know if it really was herself, or if it was God through his Spirit.
Projecting her to us.
Exactly. Something that, maybe just a image you wouldn't have followed. But this woman, you followed
her several times.
And then that can also bring comfort to the family, to Renee and to his father, Frank. I know the family well. That God was on the scene. He was there. And probably because of that, his life was saved.
That's
Yeah, there would have been if we had not had.
he would not have made it.
We had no reason to be so far away from the
From where the
area.
actual accident
Yeah,
happened.
'cause he was far away from the bridge. Furthest, I think.
Yeah, the
He was
furthest,
probably
yeah,
the furthest
the
we
furthest.
got from the bridge, because we were ready to circle back and see what we could do. It just and at the same time, we thought we were just going to recover a body.
Yeah.
We had no idea
That he was still alive.
Wow.
He was literally with his head in the water,
Wow.
chest up, just floating.
And that was for a while, because Bridget Gosa was in the water for at least 10, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
right? And he was the last one that you recovered.
Correct. So he had been in the water for quite a while already.
Face down,
Face
most
down.
likely.
Most likely, yeah.
Wow.
And we didn't have to perform any kind of life-saving.
As soon as they flipped him over in the water,
He gave his
he
first breath
just
there.
began yelling.
Wow.
I mean, it was just, we were shocked that he was alive.
That's
Yeah.
miraculous.
It really is. The goal of the podcast is not to offend anybody or obviously bring bad light of things. I know we got some backlash from someone that we didn't think was going to
We
be.
would get it from them. yeah.
But that's not our goal. It's not to offend anybody. It's to cover the story from as many credible sources as possible. And I think we're doing a very detailed job. I think this is the most detailed account of what happened on the water that night. And we need your help. We want your help to be able to find these people that can come on a show and share their stories and tell us what happened in their own words from what they experienced, because I think we also got, some people were saying that we're painting a bad picture of the Coast Guard and everything else, but that's what happened that.
Chris, if somebody can find Chris.
Yeah, here's the Coast Guard's chance to get one of their own to come on and say what they saw. Maybe we had it wrong the whole time,
Yeah.
but until there's the other side of the story, our side, which has been the truth since the beginning, 20 years ago. And
Even in our affidavits. Yeah.
And some of the captains had some things to say about how the Coast Guard were that night as well. Come on.
Yeah, and we welcome it. Obviously, there's just so much depth to this, and we want to uncover as much as we can because we want to do our due diligence to be able to put out the right content with the correct, everything that happened from that person's perspective, even if it's this conversation.
The incident merits the truth and the detail of it. So I think that at the end of the day, that's the ultimate goal. To really inform those who take the time to want to know what happened that night and what it was like to be a part of that evening or that morning, actually.
So once again, thank you for joining the podcast, Pastor Hyde. It's great finally meeting you, hearing about you for so long.
Mm-hmm.
I edited the video, so I keep hearing about your little part. I was like, I feel like I know this guy.
Him already, yeah. He has that effect on you.
Just a little part.
Well, it was a big part for us.
For us, yeah, it really was.
So once again, guys, thank you all very much, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.